but there is some amazing topics that have really come to the fore over the last 12 to 18 months as leadership has been stretched to its absolute limit. There has been no roadmap for a pandemic. So, what do you do in terms of building leaders for the future, but being a good leader today as well? So, I'm delighted to have a couple of people joining me today to talk through some of those topics. And I'm going to begin with looking at this whole piece of how do you innovate in this kind of environment, because really how you find new ways forward, how you deal with things is going to be probably the top of many leaders' minds who are having to manage in a very volatile and uncertain world. So to begin with, I'm delighted to welcome in Darshita Gillies, who runs her business, which is all really about innovation and leveraging platforms. So invite you in to switch on your camera. Lovely to see you again as well. Tell us a little bit about how you see the role of a leader in terms of innovating when they might not always be the most innovative person in the business, but they're having to lead in an innovative way.
Super, thank you. What a fantastic set of questions as well, because I was listening to the prior one about the role of technology, and this leads also very much into what kind of humans make those decisions. And so I'd like to share like a couple of opening thoughts on this. And I would say being a leader is about two things. One is who you be, and the second is what do you do. And starting with who you are being as a leader is, I would say, the first and the most important thing that pretty much any and every member in a business needs to invest in. And we've all seen it in examples, but I've seen it in real life in practice running our business, is where we have empowered every single person in our team to connect with their own sense of purpose and drive whatever it is that they're doing. In this way, you're not relying on one person to look up to as a leader. You are really building the leadership capacity in the team. And so this would be like my first, sort of tip for anyone and everyone in the audience, is build capacity for developing the leadership being. And what do you do as a leader? I think gone is the day where the leader would say and the team would go out and get it done. I think there is a time, and especially when it comes to innovation, a time for a much more involved leadership that's needed. I'll talk more, but I wanted to just frame the answer in these two buckets, which is how, who you be and how you do. And then obviously just the last point on innovation. I think innovation is so much more, and innovation can be applied in so many business areas. So I would say to think of innovation itself more broadly and not just in terms of technology.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring in on our other panel member, coming back to you with questions as well. But let me welcome Michael Chissick, who's managing partner of Fieldfisher, who has got a very strong credibility within the transformational piece. Lovely to see you, Michael. Welcome. Hi, good to see you. We were just obviously talking through there around the role of a leader, perhaps as an innovator, but let's just touch on not on technology itself, but on the fact that every business or every firm maybe today is a digital business, whether it wants to be or not, because of the role in digital transformation. What's your view on digital transformation, the role of a leader in that?
Should we start with what is digital transformation? Because it's a bit of a buzz term and it's thrown around a lot. And at its simplest, it's replacing non-digital and manual business tasks and processes. So I think back to when I was a trainee at Herbert Smith in the 1980s. My first job was I spent 4 months in a room surrounded by thousands of leaf arch files with a post-it note, trying to find keywords for a disclosure exercise. Now it's all done by data extraction tools. And we've all been through a huge amount of digital transformation as we've adapted to home working. But for me, it's a holistic approach to integrating technology into all areas of a PSF's business. And the 2 points I really want to pick out, really, because it's not for me to tell you all about the great AI and cloud and e-documentation, auto-processation. We had a good panel discussion beforehand, but there's 2 aspects I'd like to pick up on. Firstly is how, as a leader, you can use digital transformation to deliver the right service for the client. So it's putting the clients at the center of what you're doing and what the client expectation is. And there's also something around our young millennials and what they're looking for digital transformation. And the next thing is making sure that if you're going to embark on a digital transformation journey as a leader, that you fit it in with everything else. So you've got your premises strategy and your home working strategy and your digital workflows and your right shoring, etc. So you've got to put it within the concept of all of the other jigsaw pieces as well.
Thank you for also giving us that explanation what digital transformation really is, because as you say, it's a super buzzword. The last member of our panel is Neil, is the founder and managing director of Informal Networks. Lovely to have you with us, Neil. Have you pop your camera on and we can join the panel there. And what I was going to start off with asking Neil was that question about it being a leader at the moment is an incredibly challenging time. Hi, Neil. Incredibly challenging moment. So we thought that we'd have a little bit of discussion around the fake it till you make it concept of leadership. If you aren't quite there yet, how do you that piece of giving people enough confidence that you can get there, but also how do you manage leadership when actually you don't yet have the skills and you're still working on it? So over to you, Neil.
It's a title I couldn't resist. Fake it till you make it. If you just look at some of the research that's been done of leaders and you know, how many good leaders are there out there? What percentage are really good leaders? The answer is 1 in 6. Few in the States. A job lead because of their direct boss. 3/4. And 14% say that succession planning is done well. 86% say no. And I think that perhaps the thing I'd like to say at the beginning is that I think we need to think very fundamentally differently about how we select and use the real leaders in organizations.
Thank you. Gosh, that's a challenge, isn't it? 1 in 6 of us. I think we're all sitting here going, are we the 1 in 6? Or maybe we're not. Well, let's take it to another part of this whole leadership piece. Is that what makes a good leader in volatile times? It's actually sometimes easier to be a leader when things aren't changing, but the real leadership comes through when you're having to deal with different areas. So let me come back to Darshita. What do you think the most helpful thing that a leader can be doing when there isn't a clear roadmap and when you do need to have to make some big decisions, limited background information?
Yep, I think this is something that we've all faced with COVID. And we've seen it in terms of not knowing when the doors will open, when the teams will be able to come back again. And I think the most successful organizations that have emerged during this time are the ones that have had the long-term view in the way they operate, but have made very important short-term decisions that allow for the best flow of work to happen in the short term. And I think whilst we think, you know, it's not good to think of short term for situations we find ourselves in and the pace of innovation, it's almost impossible to plan even a year ahead. As an organization, we follow the OKRs, the objectives and key results. And what we found really helpful is setting up quarterly objectives. And it's not, annual objectives, but then having the key results only defined for the quarter. So we know our objective is to meet something in the long run, but at every quarter, we are able to just shape shift and align our priorities and activities as a team to deliver what's important and most critical in the next 3 months.
real agility there, isn't there, and being able to think both in terms of something that's an end game, but making it quite flexible as you're going along, which is interesting. And Michael, what's your sort of take on that? How would you view this area?
Yeah, it's been a challenging year, I think, for all leaders. We've had to adapt from sitting around a table, all being together, to having to make some pretty huge decisions in a very different way. I think for me, it's staying focused. There's been a bit of an overload of data and change and adaptation to everything that's going on. And I think for me as a leader, just drowning out some of the noise and just focusing in on one or two or three key objectives has been a key part of how I think we've got through a challenging year.
Neil, in terms of your knowledge and experience, I know you've done a lot around group chemistry and effect.
I mean, we're in a tricky position because of the problems we've had recently and so on. But you know, when it's fundamentally, if you look at almost everything that's there for leadership development, it's all related to behaviors. If you look at everything right the way up to neuroscience and emotional intelligence, you name it, it all ends up in some form of desired behaviors. And what we've discovered, and others have started to discover, is that when you're looking to find really effective, influential leaders, particularly those who are influential within their teams, when you're looking to try and find those sort of people, you're on the wrong track just doing the behaviors. Behaviors that are fine-tuning. The first step you've got to get is make sure you have the real leaders in place. And that's where informal networks comes into place. You're looking at who are the influencers, who are the innovators. And when you have great lists of those and you started, first of all, you can use them in change programs. You don't even have to promote them at this point. They're effective leaders. And we've all worked in some big change programs where non-leaders have effectively led the entire change because we've put them in place as influencers. If you happen to have got a bit ahead of the game and you're increasing the numbers of real leaders you have, influential, innovative type people, if you manage to get ahead of that game, then you're in a much stronger position to handle the sort of problems we have at the moment. And I think over the next 1-2 years, you're likely to see a huge change in how managers are selected and developed.
That's thinking about the future, building the talent pool, positioning people so they're ready for that succession planning. So there's a lot of forethinking there that's really powerful. Let me pick up on that topic of effective leadership, because I think we've all worked for people who've been really effective leaders, and we probably all work for people who've been maybe slightly less so. What do you think makes for a really effective leader? So Darshita, I'm going to come back to you. What are those traits? What are those things that you think really do make a difference?
Personally, I feel most effective way to lead people is where you can crystallize very clearly what is the end goal the team is going to work towards, and you can drive that sense of clarity across every stakeholder or participant in the process of delivering that end outcome. I feel driving clarity is something that I've found to be the hardest, but also the most effective way to get stuff done. So if I have to pick one trait or one attribute, I would say driving clarity.
Love that, because that is a little bit of a jewel if you can do it, or at least being able to give some clarity around the topic is incredibly helpful. Really like that. Michael, but do you share the same sort of view, or that other traits that you see in the really effective leaders that you come across?
Yeah, so for me, at a time of crisis, which hopefully we're now coming out, it's a leader that over communicates. You've got to be present. I think it's very important as well as a leader to set the right destination. So you've got the whole organization going behind you. You can change that destination. It's kind of an organic effort. You never actually reach the destination, but making sure everyone knows where the organization is going and I think a sense of role model, purpose, authenticity, all wrap into what makes a good leader.
And I sometimes think people get quite scared about that sort of volume of traits, and then they're sort of concerned, can you from your experience, Michael, you must see people who actually on the face of it look pretty normal and yet are doing a fantastic leadership job. But what turns the person who has those traits into someone who can really execute on them?
Yeah, I mean, you can only be a leader if people will follow. We're professional service firms have lots of good managers, but those few people that can set themselves apart from the managers and have people that want to follow. It's, as I said, it's great communication. It's someone who lives the values, who is someone who is aspirational. There are lots of complex qualities there. But you can learn it on the job. If you've got a great role model, you can learn the attributes, I believe, of being a good leader.
Thank you. And Neil, same question for you: is what is an effective leader, and how can you become one if you're not convinced that you are one yet?
I think we're not coming from a totally different mindset. Everyone speaking so far is very much putting a reasonably traditional slant on leadership. It can be learnt. It can be, with good behaviors and good approaches, we can all become good leaders. That's not true. And I think the basic reason that it's not true is that tend to be selected in practice by their followers. So if the leaders are being selected by their followers, and those followers are going to select people who are in their group, they're in people who have background that's similar, etc. So they are surprisingly constrained. You can have people who have all the skill sets and still not an effective, influential leader with their team. And the simplicity of informal networks is that it asks the fundamental influences who, and you look at the names on the lists and you start shutting down. If you end up with 30-40% of the people selecting people who are influential to them, not in their team, you have opportunities to start moving that around.
The obvious question is, how do you become a good influencer? How do you turn yourself into being someone who really does influence, as opposed to looks on the face that he should have the traits, but isn't executing on that?
Essentially what it is, we don't know. And by accepting that we don't know, we open the door. Because effectively, by doing a survey for informal networks, you ask the question of everybody, off the record, who influences you? Oh, by the way, we quite often say, please exclude your direct manager. We don't want pressure being applied when we do that sort of surveys. And we're looking at the list. These are the people. And if you look at real influencers, they will vary in the junior management ranks from 10 people who are being influenced to perhaps 50. And you'll find one person who's influencing 50 individuals. It's massive, and it's out of all contexts. And as soon as you have that capability to shuffle people between teams, because who influences whom, and then knowing the people who are influential and putting them in the right teams, then you can start training them with all the good leadership skills that we've been talking about. But it's that way around and not the other.
Francesca, could I just come in?
Michael, please.
I don't really buy this concept that we're all really bad leaders. I'm here as a managing partner of a professional service firm. I look at professional service firms. They are outperforming the market. They've largely got through the last year and kept 99% of jobs, tapped into very little of government support, and continue to do above average margins. I'm not sure I buy this only 5%. And I'm not sure I buy your concept that leaders are nowadays come from a pack of people who are all like-minded. I think that's also very outdated, Neil. I think you'll find a lot of today's leaders of professional service firms come from very different backgrounds from the 20, 30 years ago if we went to the same school. It's far more modern and diverse and inclusive. And I think some of your views, when I say respect, are a bit outdated.
Two very different views about whether you can actually create a leader, whether you can actually bring a leader through, and how you can use that. So I'm going to give the final word to Darshita, because we're going to be right out of town in a minute. Darshita, final comment from you before we wrap this session up, because I think there should be some really good constructive conflict around leadership. I think that's always a really helpful thing. But final word to you.
Thank you, indeed. And I consider myself as an integrator. So bringing together, I think, both views is equally valid and important. But if I have to find the and way, I would say I don't think we should go by anything that's been in the past as a measure for what will be in the future. And what's really important is that any firm harnesses and cultivates a culture of empowerment. And I'm seeing one of the questions in the Q&A panel as well, which is young talent, starting their career. How do you empower them while they're still offline? They've never actually experienced working culture. Many of the graduates many firms have hired graduates, but none of them have been inculcated into a sort of a corporate working culture. So I think there are opportunities that come from the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I would say for pretty much any and every leader or to-be leader is, if you want to influence, the key is deliver something that is of value, either to your team internally or to your clients externally. Find what is of value and find a way to get people around the table to deliver that value, and you will find yourself influencing. And I would say create, for all firms out there, create the culture you want, foster and hire talent, incentivize colleagues that show good behavior, even if it's just a certificate of appreciation. It doesn't have to have a cost tag to it, but there are little things that can be done that can really foster a sense of creativity and empowerment in the organization, and that's what needs to be supported in the coming future. Thank you.
Fantastic. Lovely way to bring it together. I think we could go on for a lot longer. There's so many other things that we could discuss, and good to see some different views. Really important that we don't all just follow the same path. There are many different ways of doing that. I'd highly recommend a brilliant book called Unleashed, which is all about empowerment by leaders as well, which I think speaks to some of the things, Darshita, that you highlighted so nicely there. So